Hello there, and welcome back to another episode of TA with MK. My name is McKay, and I haven't posted for a couple of days, but we had ourselves a good Memorial Day weekend. I hope you guys had a good weekend as well. And for those of you that were lucky enough to have, Monday off, I hope that 3-day weekend helped clear your mind, get you ready for a good start to June. Today's the last day of May, so we're saying goodbye to May, and we're getting ourselves ready for what will hopefully be a good month in June, whether that's trading or just life. Hopefully all of it's just amazing, and I'm excited for it. Today's video, we're just going to briefly go over what happened with Bitcoin over the weekend, what the SPX or S&P 500 is doing right now, the key levels. This is going to be more of just a reconfirmation of something I mentioned in a previous video of a key level or levels that I'm looking for during this week as Bitcoin's trying to push higher. What we kind of expect, and we're going to amp it up a bit as this week goes on. I didn't post any videos over the weekend, like I said, but we're going to amp it up. We're going to put out some more training videos, some better TA, just more in-depth TA anyway. I'm not suddenly going to magically get a lot better at TA than I already am, but I just mean we're going to share a little bit more, try to make the videos a little more exciting, so I hope you guys are looking forward to that. If you're enjoying the content, please remember to like and subscribe, and let's go. It's TA with MK. It's TA with MK. Now, I'm on the SPX, and this is the 12-hour chart. Normally, I'd be zoomed in a little bit more than the 12-hour, but I want to zoom out here in a second, and I'll have to change the time frame just to show you kind of what I'm looking at. Now, we discussed about a week ago, or whatever that would have been, sometime down here around the 20th of May, we were still inside of this falling wedge, right? We were talking about for any upward price action movement to be expected out of the SPX and then Bitcoin, we needed to see a break and a retest. We need to see a break out of this falling wedge, essentially, right? We had this top trend line, this bottom trend line. We've just been consolidating with lower highs, lower lows. Nothing new here. We talked about this several days in a row, just kind of waiting for it to do something. It finally broke out, right? Now, on our previous videos to end last week, because we actually closed Friday of this past week, going into Memorial Weekend at this resistance, which we're still at. But if you zoom out now, we've also been talking for quite some time about to me, the biggest test we would face, even once we broke this. I remember saying specifically that a breakout from this falling wedge at some point wouldn't surprise me, and a run up to this red zone where I've marked with one time back here, where it was obviously support, one time, 3 times here in a row where it bounced, and bounced, right? So 3 separate times it acted as support there. It acted briefly as support here, and then after it lost it, this one candle right here actually wicked up, retested that zone as a bearish retest as resistance, right? Previously support all that time, became resistance, and that led kind of to the larger pullback that we saw, or the continued pullback, I should say, that we were seeing. Well, now, as we have about an hour and a half left today before the daily candle closes, a little bit less than that, actually, about an hour and 15 minutes. We're still fighting that resistance. Now, I did mention also when we closed under that on Friday that it wouldn't surprise me if it took us, a few tries to get through that. I don't know if we'd have enough steam after having, several days in a row of green for the S&P 500. It would make sense to come back and possibly flip this lower level here as support, put in a higher low, maybe even something lower than that. But we'll see, because we've also been discussing for the past ever since this breakout, we thought we might get rejected here first. We went right through that. So we've been pushing up pretty good. Things have been finally bullish for a bit. So we'll keep an eye on that as we move over to Bitcoin. But just keep in mind that for Bitcoin to make any major move, it's already made a pretty big move, which we'll talk about. But for it to make anything beyond that, in my opinion, it'll happen once the SPX breaks that resistance. And now we're over here on the Bitcoin 4-hour chart, and I guess the exciting thing that did happen over the weekend, which wasn't necessarily something I was expecting, just because, we did close below resistance on the SPX. The move that the SPX had been making up to that point, as we discussed in our previous video, Bitcoin hadn't really been following, which was odd because Bitcoin had been so mirror for mirror of every move the SPX had made up to that point of the breakout. Every time the SPX had a pullback, Bitcoin had a pullback, etc. And, then you had YouTubers coming out and saying that the correlation between the stocks and Bitcoin had broken, which, simply just isn't true. It was lagging behind, essentially. First, their reasoning for that was actually previously when SPX had a pullback one day and Bitcoin didn't follow. So a lot of people started saying, hey, it's broken that correlation, it's doing its own thing. Well, no, not so much. It just lagged behind and then had its pullback later. Well, flip that script, and the same thing happened on its breakout, right? SPX broke out, had been pushing higher for a couple days in a row, and Bitcoin had continued to just consolidate within this descending triangle, more or less, with lower highs and, you know, not necessarily lower lows, but just lower highs. So it just kept consolidating. I think people were just waiting to be a little bit more, we were being more cautious, I guess you could say, because we needed to see, is this breakout for the SPX legit? You know, because if it isn't, Bitcoin's a little bit higher risk asset. So, you know, if you're a big well and you're going to start putting money in this, you want to feel like the breakout's legit. Also, some of the indicators were just lagging behind as far as looking bullish. And at the end of the day, if you're trading an asset, especially if you're with tons of money, you know, you're just because the stocks are, you know, doing well doesn't necessarily mean that it's the exact right time to do Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin, as long as it's got potential to move higher, which it has had for the past week or so. We've discussed in videos that we expected a relief rally at some point before, you know, another retest of the lows or potentially even lower lows. The indicators hadn't all quite lined up yet. The MACD hadn't crossed bullish really yet, things of that nature, which I'm not going to discuss in this video, but just keep in mind that just because one will make a move slightly before the other does not mean they've lost correlation. I can tell you right now, if the SPX has a giant rejection tomorrow and pulls back, you know, 5%, Bitcoin's not going to pump. You know, it may not pull back. It may only pull back 5% itself. It may pull back 10. You know, it may wait a next half a day and then pull back, but it's going to follow it more or less. That trend or that correlation has not been broken, so don't let anybody kid you with that. So, but anyway, what happened over the weekend is we had this descending triangle we've been in, right, ever since around the beginning of May. I guess it's been more around the 10th or 11th of May or so, you know, where we were just putting in a series of high, lower high, lower high, right? That was creating this trend line here. The bottom, we kind of had a zone that it was bouncing off of. Just the rallies were getting less and less. But this is what we call price compression. It's just getting compressed down, normally around 70 to 75% full. This is why triangles are a preferred pattern to trade, because they tend to break out between 70 and 75%. And even if they go all the way, the nice thing is they have an apex, which is the end of the triangle, where at that point you expect some sort of a move, whether it's to break down or break up, right? So they're just a good pattern to trade. In fact, I always say in my videos, I put the most emphasis on support and resistance levels as far as price. Price matters to me way more than any pattern, but if you can combine or have confluence with some, a pattern, that obviously helps your chances. And one of my favorite are just triangles, whether they're symmetrical triangles, descending triangles, or ascending triangles. I think they're some of the easiest patterns to trade. But at any rate, let me clean this up real quick and just kind of discuss what we've had happen so far. So the measured move for that, and I just took what's kind of the conservative measured move, but this was the first high essentially within the descending triangle. You know, some of this price action back here that dipped below or came up here, it hadn't created a pattern yet. If you're going to call this a descending triangle, you need to take, you know, the level that's the low and what was your first high in that. I made that little mark. We just moved it over here, and that was the measured move. And if you look, it essentially perfectly hit that measured move, which was right around 32,400-ish. Now at this point, it's also, we're on a 4-hour chart again, and as you guys know from previous videos, I've mentioned that the 200 MAs hold a lot of weight. A lot of people, especially on the 4-hour, will use those either as buying areas or selling areas, and as you can see, the price action got rejected at that measured move, which is also obviously just a level of resistance anyway, around 32,500. We've talked about that before. And also at this moment, you can see I've circled that the 200 yellow SMA and the 200 blue EMA are acting as resistance. So a pullback at this point, whether it's just to this level here or clear back down to here, would make sense. In fact, down here would be your strongest level. If this is not ultimately going to all end up being what's called a bull trap, which just means that we break all the way back down and start heading back down, right, and flip completely bearish again, to come back down here to this level that was resistance, 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 and clearly you can see when it broke out, it created another big leg higher. If this was to break down a little further, I would imagine that if things are going to remain bullish, there should be a large group of buyers waiting back down here around 30,600, 30,700 area. So that's what we're going to keep an eye on over the next, 12 to 24 hours. All right, guys and gals. Now, we're not going to church it up. That's a phrase I always used as a kid. If it's a phrase you've never used or heard before, the way I intended at least to be used is just, we're not going to fancy it up. We're not going to get too fancy with you. We're not going to church it up. We're not going to throw on a tux and tie and sell you anything too fancy here. All I'm going to say is that this is something we brought up the other day, and this is still the thing I'm watching the most as it relates to getting any sort of midterm bullish. There's a lot of charts I want to share with you guys over the next few days to weeks if we can get some bullish upside, which, as we talked about, the SPX needs to start, Bitcoin needs to follow, but we discussed this on a previous video where this level of around 31,700-ish, very, very close to that. Between 31,000, we'll say 500 and 31,750. That's an area that's important to me because if you look back here, ever since Bitcoin broke above this level of 30K or 31K, 32K, right? Even here it retested, it had candles all close above, and then it went on another crazy run. All through the summer last year, when May till the breakout in July, as it was consolidating downwards in its own descending triangle. I'm obviously much larger than the one that we just previously were in. That one went on for months and months. But if you look, it closed these two bodies. It had wicks below, wick, 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 even back here, bunch of wicks. But it always kept these bodies closed above that range, right? And then it went on its next crazy run. So that's what I've been looking for. And the way we want to know, or the way we're going to hopefully trade this to avoid what we would call a bull trap, is we need a weekly candle body to close back, and I say body to be specific, to close back above that range. Otherwise, this will just be looked at as a bearish retest. And what I mean by bearish retest, as we've talked about, anytime you have a major level, so we're going to call this, resistance up here, this support down here, price action, maybe bouncing between the two, or whatever the case may be, right? Anytime you lose a major level of support, so a level that had been holding up, on many occasions, especially on a higher time frame, and then it goes back up and retests that area but isn't able to break above it, that's just what's known as a bearish retest, and you're going to see more downside, right? Which would mean everything that's been happening over the past few days or few hours, I guess 24 hours, where Bitcoin's actually finally making a move. From a weekly standpoint, which we just started a new week, so this is going to be Sunday, so we've got about 5-6 days before the weekly candle closes. That'll be significant. Even if we dip down below in the meantime again, because we're retesting 31,000 or 30,800, something like that, that's fine. But with this bullish move, what we want to see is this body close back above, especially if it could close around 32,000 or higher. That would make me bullish for us to then at least push up to some of these next levels of resistance up around 35K first, a lot of 35K resistance back in here, between 35 and 37K. I even mentioned in a video from a few weeks ago when Bitcoin was in the middle of all of this crap we've been dealing with, right, that at some point a relief rally back up to around 37K would make sense to me. More conservative targets were between 33 and 35, especially with just the overall market sentiment and the economy and stuff. But just from a TA perspective, if you ignored the rest of the world, which we obviously can't do, 37 just made sense as far as what happens typically from a percentage point, a relief rally during the middle of the bear market, which I still believe we're in a bear market right now. Doesn't matter actually what I believe that obviously we are, whether it's a long term or a mid term or short term. Clearly, when you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 straight weekly red candles, which is something Bitcoin has never done in its history. What would you call that? A bad day? Well, obviously it was 9 bad weeks. So that's a bear market in my mind. So I know I rambled on a lot there, but at the end of the day, that's what I'll be watching for as this week progresses. Obviously, we'll have to zoom in and we can do some short-term trades. I will leave a link in the description for my Telegram group, which we're starting to get some more members. That's the better place to join us for short-term trades and ideas. It's harder to post anything short-term on a YouTube video because by the time you guys watch it, it's not relevant anymore, right? And I've discussed that before as well. So check that link in the description. Join us, become part of our community. We're having a lot of fun over there. But just to kind of summarize this up, we'll be watching at the end of this week for this body of this candle to close over 31,750, we'll say. And as we wrap today's video up, I just want to mention, if you guys are liking or disliking the content or have any ideas for the content, just remember that we YouTube creators, or at least we should, most YouTube creators, we do our content for our audience, which is for you guys and gals. And obviously we want to try to make that as interesting as possible for you. So if you guys have any suggestions or anything you'd like me to talk about in future videos, please leave me a comment in the comments section, whether it's something as simple as, hey, we don't understand why your hat has your name on it. you know, or something stupid like that. I don't care. You know, just leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking. And if you guys are generally liking the content up to this point, please remember to like and subscribe, share, and all of that. You guys have a good day. It's TAwithMMK.